I'm Loredana Hager and welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to share with you a recipe that has been in my family for many years. And actually, to be honest, I really don't know the origin. When I've asked my mom about this particular recipe, she thinks that it was my grandmother who came up with it. And this would be my dad's mom. His family owned a restaurant in Italy, but I'll tell you more about that at another time. But I can just imagine my grandmother being in the kitchen and trying to come up with a creative way of using two very simple ingredients, tomatoes and a type of pasta that I'm going to show you in a minute, and how to put the two together and create this wonderful dish that my mom has made many times, and I've carried on the tradition. The name of the dish is called Maccheroni, Sotto e Sopra. Of course, you probably have heard the term macaroni. In the American culture, many think that it's a short pasta, or could refer to spaghetti. In Italian, it really refers to a full gamut of different types of pasta. But for this type of dish, we're going to be using linguine. It is a particular type of noodle that is just perfect for this dish. Of course, then the other part of the name of that recipe, Maccheroni Sotto e Sopra, Sotto means under, Sopra means on top. And what it's referring there are the tomatoes. So the tomatoes will be on the bottom and they will be on top. And the linguine will be in the middle. Now, regarding the tomatoes that I like to use for this dish, I have several here in this bowl that I like to show you right now. There are the Roma tomatoes, that are some Marzano tomatoes, and I also have Better Boy tomatoes. Or my husband is actually, I give him full credit, has grown some Marzano this past summer in our garden along with the Better Boy. If you have looked at some of my YouTube channel recipes when I'm making sauce, I've mentioned about this particular type of tomato, the San Marzano. The reason I really like this is because it has a lot of pulp, doesn't have a lot of water. The Roma tomatoes that you can find in the store very easily is very similar. It also has a lot of pulp. So if you cannot find San Marzano or you don't grow them, you can replace it with the Roma tomatoes. The other type of tomato that I mentioned are the Better Boy, and it has a lot more water. So if you're going to use these tomatoes, I would suggest or strongly recommend that once you slice them, and I'll show you in a minute how I do that, that you drain them so you get rid of some of that excess water. You can see that I have quite a bit of tomatoes in here. There's probably close to 20, 25. I'm going to be using all of them. And I will also use about the whole packet of linguine. This is about a pound of linguine, which will probably serve 4 to 6 people, depending whether you use this dish as an entree, if you're a vegetarian, or if you want to do it as a side dish along with other vegetables or meat that you like to serve this. So I've just shared with you these ingredients. What also makes this dish very special is the amount of pepper and the amount of salt. You put a lot of pepper in this dish. That's where the heat comes from, and it's just a wonderful combination with the tomatoes and the linguine. And last but not least is the wonderful extra virgin olive oil that you will also need. So I've put some water in a large pot. I've added some salt and a bit of olive oil, and I'll going to be turning it on and let that come to a boil. And then I will show you how to cook the linguine, which will be the first step or the first phase of putting this dish together. The water has been boiling, and I've thrown in the linguine, and I'll show you in a minute to let you know when they need to come out. On the package that I have, it states that they should cook for about 10 to 11 minutes if you want them to have al dente. For this particular recipe, we want them less than al dente, so almost raw, because they will finish cooking in the oven. But I will tell you roughly how many minutes I kept them in the water. I wanted to show you how I cut the tomatoes, and actually I would strongly recommend that you do this step first before deciding the type of dish and how much linguine you're going to use, because it will determine whether you have enough. And I realized after I cut the tomatoes that I don't have enough for a whole pound of linguine and the dish that I originally selected. So I went and chose a smaller one, and I put in the pot of boiling water about 10 ounces of linguine. Right here on this cutting board, there are the 3 different types of tomatoes that I showed to you earlier in a bowl, and these are the San Marzano, the Roma tomatoes, and also the Better Boy. What you want to do is you want to cut the tomato, the top and the bottom part, so that you're creating, remember, Sotto, Sopra, and you have the linguine in the middle. If the tomato is quite bulky or large, you'll have a middle section. In some instances, I've put that on the side, and these can be used for sandwiches, for other uses that you may find later on. I will use perhaps some of the middle part of the smaller tomatoes, just that I have enough coverage on the plate. So again, cut them, and as you can hear that beep, that's telling me that it's time for me to check to see if the linguine are quite ready. So they've been in the water less than about 4 minutes, and I think they are ready to come out. So I'm going to turn off the heat, and I will take this and take it to the sink to drain the water. You want to make sure that you have all the excess water come out. It's very steamy and very hot. Just be careful when you're doing this. Now, you also may want to wait a few minutes for this to cool off so that you can handle it, because I'll show you in a minute when you're putting it together, you're going to get messy and you're going to use your hands. Please, please, please do not, I repeat, do not rinse the linguine, okay? You'll get rid of all the starchiness that's in the linguine. You do not want to do that. So you're just going to have to be patient and let it cool off by itself, not by pouring cold water over it. So again, just give it a good shake, make sure all the water, and I'll give it a few minutes, and then we'll be back and I will show you how to put this together. So we're back, and this is the final phase before this dish goes in the oven, is the putting it together. The linguine I've cooled off so I can handle them. I've got the tomatoes here. As you can see, I've kind of flipped them over because what I want to do is I want to choose the better looking ones to go on top, just for aesthetic purposes when you're taking it to the table. But you'll see once it's cooked, it'll be flattened, it'll be nice and crispy. But just for presentation's sake, I like to use the nicer looking ones and take the other ones and put them on the bottom. The first thing you want to do with the dish, and this is a dish that I've selected to put the 10 ounces of cooked or partially cooked linguine and the tomatoes that I have in front of me. You want to apply some olive oil at the bottom and be generous. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the tomatoes, and you want to have the bottom part of the tomato, the cut part of the tomato showing upward, and this one going on the bottom. And you want to try to cover the whole bottom, because you want to create kind of a barrier sort of, or a layer for the linguine to rest on. So as you can see, I'm just choosing to see how they fit. This dish is not quite square or rectangular, but that's fine. Just make the pieces fit like a jigsaw puzzle. I'll take that one. And now I also mentioned that I might use some of the middle part. So I'm not going to use it on the edges or on the outside of the corner, but I'll probably put it in the middle. So, because the reason I want these in the corner is that when you're cutting the pieces, you want something to hold it together. And so because it has the peel, it will do that. This has no peel. It's all pulp on either side. So I'm just kind of using it as coverage and I'm putting it in the middle. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit. But if you have plenty of tomatoes, and what I've done in the past that I found really, that has worked well for me, it has been to use the grape tomatoes. They're a little bit bigger than cherry tomatoes. You just need a whole lot. And I just split them in half. I use the whole tomato. I always, again, bottom and top, and put the linguine in the middle. That will work just as well. So I'm trying to see the size. It doesn't have to fill every single hole, but you want as much coverage as possible. I think, let's see, put that one there and one more. Okay, so I think we're good to go. I hope you can see this, how I've laid them out there. So what you want to do next with these tomatoes is put a generous amount of salt. And then you also want to put a very generous amount of pepper. Remember what I said, the pepper, the heat is what really also brings this dish alive. What you're going to do now, before you put the final layer of the tomatoes on top, is to put the linguine in the middle. And what I do, as I said, that's why I wanted this to be cooled off. I use my hands. You can see they're flexible enough, but I can tell when I'm holding them that they're not cooked, not even close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread it out a little bit. Okay. So before I put the next layer of the remainder of the linguine that I have in there, I'm going to again salt this and put pepper. Now I did put salt in the water and that's fine, but you want to add additional salt again to give it flavor because there's no sauce going over the spaghetti. It's not your typical tomato sauce. So you want to have the flavor. And even more importantly than the salt, you want to add again the pepper. Yeah. Before I put the next layer, I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil. And now I'm ready to add the remainder of the linguine that's in here. While you're putting this together, I would recommend that you turn on the oven at 400 so that it will be preheating while you're putting this together. So you're going to, again, add a little more salt. And a little more pepper. Probably more pepper than salt. So the final step is actually adding just a touch of olive oil. And now what I'm going to be doing is I'm adding the tomatoes on top. As you can see, I'm kind of squishing them, and you'll probably be doing that throughout the process because this will kind of shrink, it'll dry out, and the the tomatoes will actually purposefully and intentionally flatten them out as they cook. But for the first 10 minutes or so in the oven, you can just leave them like that, just settle them in with your hands, and then I'll show you how you can use a spatula to do that. So I think they're ready to go in the oven, but one more thing, let me wash my hands. I'm going to be adding one last layer of, you guessed it, pepper and salt and olive oil. Again, I'm going to go easy on the salt and add a little more pepper, as I like pepper more than salt actually. Just a touch of olive oil. And as you can see, it's ready to go in the oven. We'll be checking on it in about 10 minutes, and I'll show you how I mentioned using a spatula to flatten out those tomatoes as it continues to cook. Well, the dish is finally ready. When I first started with this, and I mentioned that it would take about 40 to 45 minutes at 400, it actually ended up being in the oven for about 55 minutes, and I took it out every 10 minutes to flatten out the tomatoes and so that the juices could be seeping into the linguine and then eventually drying out. You may want to leave it in there a little for less time, but I want to show you what it looks like for me and how I really enjoy it. As you can see here, it's got a little bit of that burned edge and even the linguine here. I like that kind of crust on top. You'll see in a minute when I cut it, it's just really the top that it looks this way, not the middle. If you want it less cooked, definitely take it out a little earlier. Also, what I did after it finished cooking at 400 for about 55 minutes, I let it rest in the oven. I turned it off for another 15 minutes before I'm going to go ahead and cut it. And I recommend that you do that before serving it. So now, of course, it is the test, and the time that you are waiting for is to actually try it. So let's go ahead and cut a piece. Well, I've cut out a piece, and I want to show you, as you can see here, the layer of the linguine, and underneath is the thin layer of the tomatoes that, of course, by now, as they cook down and as I continually pressed down and smashed it, it's created a thin layer. So when you're cutting it, you'll have a thin layer of tomatoes, the linguine in the middle, and of course, the tomatoes on top. So I think I'm going to take a bite and let you know what I think. It is really, really good. It's just amazing. I never get tired of this flavor in my mouth, and I wish I had fresh tomatoes all year round to be able to make this dish. But again, you can always get Roma tomatoes or grape tomatoes or even cherry tomatoes at the store if you really get a need to have this dish. Please let me know if you're going to try it and you really like it. As well, if you've heard about this dish from other Italian families or someone that you know, I would love to hear from you. And definitely I would love to hear that you've tried it and that you have enjoyed it as much as I do. Buon appetito.